Welcome to the ultimate guide to the Device 42 Configuration Management Database, or CMDB, podcast series. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney, and in this episode, we are going to explore what a CMDB is, the elements of a CMDB, including CIs and attribute relationships, and why a clean, update-to-date CMDB is important for IT operations. And joining us today from Device 42 is Chris Benini, who is Director of Solutions Architects, and James McFadden, Senior Solutions Architect. Thank you so much for being with me today. Looking forward to this conversation. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having us today.
Okay, so let's start off here. What exactly is a configuration management database, and why is it important for IT operations?
So it's a place for all the things. So when you start talking about an organization and how they manage all of their assets, either physical, virtual, business functions, things like that, you have to have a central repository where all that information is located. And in order for you to be effective and efficient with your organization, if you don't know where everything is, or you don't have information about all your assets that you have readily available to you, you can't effectively do your job. So in layman's terms, it's a giant book of all the things. It's a list of everything about your organization. Chris, you want to?
Yeah, no, I concur there, and you're probably going to be hearing me say I agree a lot, just on some of the terminology around here. But yeah, I mean, it really is a comprehensive view of all your, your assets, and it's not just your IT estate. I mean, it could be, hardware, software, it could be system data, it could be like business metadata, it could be personnel, just tracking who the contact owner is of an application. So I think those of you that have a CMDB today, and as we go through some of this, some of the webinar, you'll see how the importance of a CMDB, but also the driver behind it too is really important. But just having a CMDB, having a place where data is aggregated, where you can store that information is really important, because it does help with things like mean time to resolution and just being able to, help with any initiatives, whether it's a hardware refresh, whether it's an acquisition that you're going through. The idea is to make sure, that you have visibility into all your infrastructure and anything that, that participates with your infrastructure as far as, personnel and, other types of metadata that I mentioned. I think kind of the next piece is that we wanted to talk a little bit about is what is the goal of a CMDB. And I think the key thing there, and I like using this terminology, is really a source of truth. And I think it's important to know that, and James, you and I talked a little bit about this, but a CMDB is really not a ticketing system. It is, it's not a discovery tool. A CMDB is really a configuration management database. So it's a place where you're tracking CIs, you're tracking relationships to those CIs. And I think, one of the things is just really having visibility into it. So a source of truth is really the ability to say, is this a place where everybody can go to, no matter what department, and get information about what they see in their environment, whether it's customer data, whether it's internal data. And I think one of the things, just kind of thinking out loud, James, is, what are your thoughts a little bit around the goal of a CMDB on top of what I had mentioned?
So I think really a fundamental goal is enabling your business to function in a effective manner. I touched on that previously, but it's really heavily used in ITIL practices, for example. So say you're trying to move an organization forward and you function in that ITIL practice, right? That's how you actually proceed and continuously develop your infrastructure, your development process, your business goals. You can't do that without an accurate CMDB. I mean, it's shameless plug here. We work for Device 42, and CMDB is a portion of our product. It's a big part of our product. So having a lot of accurate information within our product is really heavily relied on. 95% of the customers that actually come to Device 42 are looking for that central repository, looking for that single source of truth that you mentioned that actually has all the information about all of their IT assets, all of their devices, whether it be physical or virtual, even business functions. So business services, for example, is a really, really good example of things that can go into a CMDB that'll help move your business forward.
Yeah, and one last comment too is, as you see more and more customers moving to a hybrid estate or or a multi-cloud environment. There's a lot more functions that you have to track. So it's not just an IP address. There's tons of different services that are out there. So think of platform as a service. So how do you aggregate all this? How do you make sense of it? And I think obviously you have the CLI platforms for all these different vendors. But if you're using Google Cloud, if you're using AWS, you're using Azure, you have on-prem infrastructure. Think about, or you have applications that are made up of on-premise and cloud infrastructure. How do you properly store all that? And I think it's important, to know that, as things are becoming more modernized, things are becoming more complex. You're going from physical to virtual to container to cloud infrastructure, that it becomes more and more apparent that having a CMDB is important for any organization.
Okay, so now we've established what is a CMDB, why it's so important, but let's dig a little deeper. What are the elements of a CMDB?
Yeah, so great question. So, I think this is a good thing to start to also for folks to kind of analyze and understand, do they have a CMDB? How is what's being presented to them as a CMDB? So CMDB is going to be a list of configuration items. So I think I mentioned things around software and hardware, business metadata, personnel information, different services. If you have like a business service catalog or application catalog, whether these are applications that you have SLAs to meet and making sure that they're up and running, or these are internal applications or test environments. These are all things that become what we call configuration items or CIs. And on top of that, you'll have all these different attributes, right? So for each of these components, they'll have metadata that's about them. So that's, being able to say that there's a device that has an operating system. It has an IP address. It has a hardware address. It has a subnet that IP address belongs to. So these are all what you call configuration items or CIs, and then these are all the attributes that are part of them. I think what's important, though, is as you're looking at some of these CMDBs to make sure that how much of this is pre-configured, right? So if you're looking into an application, into a platform today, how much do you have to build out of the box? And I think what's really important about CMDBs is also the flexibility around them, right? So being able to, not everything out of the box is going to have, a corp code or something that is specific to your organization. So you want to make sure that you have the ability to add custom field attributes, and all this falls into a CMDB. So being able to have some line of metadata that can track common, inventory data that you have today, as well as a lot of customization data that might be specific to your organization. Now, on those CIs, there's also relationships, and I'll kind of, James, I'll pivot that to you just on how important having an attribute relationship is to a CMDB.
So when we're talking about CMDB in a place that houses all the things, all of your CIs, right? Understanding how those things relate to one another is super key. So like you were mentioned, just listing off the different types of CIs and configurable configuration items that are in a CMDB. One of the things you mentioned actually was like, hey, what subnet does this belong to, right? Well, there's going to be a lot of other things that belong that subnet to, including infrastructure that makes that subnet function altogether. So switch fabric, routers, firewalls, load balancers, things like that, right? So when we're starting to talk about what's important to actually have in a CMDB repository, not only having the individual items, but having hey, this device relies on that device, or this system or application relies on that system or application, so that when you start leveraging this CMDB in, say, an ITSM platform, so say you're feeding all of this information into something like Atlassian's JSM, for example, you can start to leverage that information to make your workflows more effective. So having a CMDB where you can say, hey, this device relates to this other device, you get an alert on an alerting system that also feeds into that ITSM platform and says, hey, a specific device is having a problem. You can quickly and effectively say, hey, that's going to affect this and this and this and this and this, specifically because you have already discovered all of those attribute relationships. So knowing what relies on what and what systems talk to what systems, hugely beneficial for a CMDB. And then that actually kind of gets into making sure that those relationships are actually kept up to date. So it's one thing to have information about CIs and kept that information up to date, but also having the relationships up to date. And Chris, I don't know, you want to talk a little bit about updating in general and making sure stuff is accurate and how important that is?
Sure. Yeah. And that's an important piece that you bring up, James. And, I have my Device 42 shirt on here, so I'm going to sponsor Device 42 in this conversation. But I will tell you that one of the big things, so if you have a CMDB right now, it doesn't matter how up to date it is or whatnot, it's better than no CMDB. So you have a place you can go to. Now, when you're thinking about a CMDB, we'll touch a little bit about, what really is, what kills a CMDB or what is a bad CMDB. But ideally, you do want something that's keeping that data up to date. So a lot of customers that we speak to today, a lot of them are doing this manually. Even when there's solutions out there like an ITSM tool that has a discovery solution, some customers aren't using it. So what they're doing is they're manually updating those their CMDB. Now, that's good to some degree, but you're only human. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to forget to update things. You're also not going to be updating everything. So it's how important it is to keep that data up to date, because when you are looking at, an incident or a change request and all of a sudden, something goes down, if you haven't updated a device or its relationships or what application it supports, or you forget to update that there's a new contact owner or app owner, sometimes, you spend 80% of a company will spend 80% of their time trying to identify who to contact before they can even remediate an issue. So I think it's really important to make sure that CMDB is up to date. And a lot of times that really leads to having a discovery tool or something that in place, whether you're scripting APIs or whatever the case is and connecting to different devices. But ideally, you want to look at something like a discovery tool that will collect that data and then feed that into a CMDB and help enrich that CMDB and keep it up to date.
Okay, so we've established a lot of good things that can come from CMDBs and why they're so important. But let's take a look on the other side for a moment. What kills a CMDB?
Yeah. There's a lot of different things that can make a CMDB. I don't even want to say it makes it a bad CMDB so much as makes it non-functional. So when we start talking about things that are bad for a CMDB, obviously bad data, bad sources for information, right? So if you're feeding a CMDB data through some integration from some system that's out of date, your effectiveness is only going to be as good as that data is involved, right? So when we start talking about not having accurate data, not tracking changes about your CIs, not being able to possibly access the data that you need due to a number of restrictions, whether that be security protocols, and security is a good thing, right? But having the individuals who are able to having the individuals that are able to access the necessary resources is going to be huge. And then lack of standardization, and then getting too many hands in the pot with their own opinions about how something should be structured, and not having some kind of organizational structure for that CMDB. CMDB is definitely going to be problematic. I know, Chris, you've seen some results of bad CMDBs in the past. Like, what does that look like from a business perspective when you have bad data, inaccurate data, improperly tracked everything?
So there's a couple things that come to mind. I mean, one thing is cost. Like, if you think about it, cost can be a lot of things. Cost can be, having to pay employees overtime and longer hours because they can't resolve issues quickly because they just don't have a CMDB or a source of truth to go to help remediate issues. Another thing could be, downtime. I mean, if you're an application, if you host an application and, you have a portal and, maybe your sweet time is around Christmas or Black Friday, and all of a sudden your system's down. I mean, think about the money that you lose during that period of time, and whether even if it's just for an hour. We've seen some crazy numbers with customers, but cost is a big thing. And it can have a lot of variances as far as supporting the CMDB or just downtime from not having an accurate CMDB. One is another thing is around increasing mean time to resolution. So if you have the whole goal is to minimize MTTR, and and I think it's a goal across any organization, doesn't matter what vertical, and really a big common denominator there is not having a source of truth or an accurate CMDB. So having a poor, bad CMDB for many reasons, as James was mentioning there, can lead to an increased mean time to resolution, and like I said, that all relates back to cost. So there's a lot of there's a lot of variances from that. The other thing too is planning, right? So you can have like poor decision making on the confidence level of making a decision on, should we take this server down? Who do we, do we know the full impact of this? These are all things, or maybe planning, so a lot of times what I find in organizations today, everybody's in a reactive state, and it's usually a result of, not having the right tooling in place so that they can utilize their time in different areas of the business, and actually do their job properly and be more proactive. So a lot of times it's reacting to things. So I think that's a big piece there is really on you have poor decision making when you don't have accurate data, and it leads to bad results. And then lastly, a big thing, I kind of hinted on it a little bit, was around maximizing personnel skill set. I mean, you can hire one of the smartest network engineers and say, this guy is going to help me build out my network. If he's busy troubleshooting issues and spending so much time doing that, I mean, you're not leveraging the skill sets that you paid this person for. You're not helping them grow. You're not allowing the organization to grow. So there's a lot of things that help that this prohibits when you don't have a source of truth. And again, I think it all really goes, a lot of these things, there's a lot of overlap, but it all comes down to, cost and mean time to resolution, poor decision making, maximizing personnel skill sets. And there's obviously a lot more, but these are big components, I think, of, what are the results of really having a bad CMDB?
So we've covered a lot of ground here, but what would you say are some key takeaways that you would like our audience to leave with today?
Sure. James, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So, number one, if you're trying to be effective in your organization and you've outgrown spreadsheets, you need a CMDB. So what is your CMDB? What do you currently have? Is it actually functional for you? What's driving the data in your CMDB? Is it actual, accurate, empirical information? Is it intervened by human fingers on a keyboard? Is it something that's actually programmatic and effective, or is it garbage data that's going to wind up sending you the wrong direction? Definitely a couple big things to look out for there. Accuracy of your data is going to be huge, and then having a CMDB that's actually functional for your organization specifically is going to be a big deal. Chris, do you want to tackle?
Yeah, I think one thing that what I've noticed too is obviously ITSM is a big area. It's a big thing that a lot of customers already have, and ITSM tools for the most part have a CMDB, and I think what I see some of these tools lacking is really like advanced enterprise discovery, and that is a way of how do we efficiently scan data across the network, whether it's a device, whether it's software installed on the device, and help enrich my CMDB. So one thing I just want to mention is, don't always reside on just the CMDB that you're kind of stuck with the ITSM tool. I mean, in some cases, obviously it's, they might have a discovery tool that can feed to that, but, there's also this notion of best in breed. And, where I'll kind of surface this is a little bit is Device42 is an agentless discovery solution. We're sort of an advanced enterprise discovery solution, and we integrate with multiple CMDBs. And it's primarily for that purpose, is that best of breed, right? So best of breed really provides better functionality. It allows organizations to be flexible and agile. So if you have, let's say a different initiative, something all of a sudden switches, or there's an acquisition, how do you really pivot when you're dedicated to one single vendor? And I think sometimes, again, going back to having, a discovery tool that's really feeding into a CMDB, is going to help improve a lot of things like mean time to resolution. It's going to improve efficiency. So I think it's really important, as you're looking at what you have today, don't be discouraged and, should I not be looking at something else, or how can I do this better? And also, think about, some of these worst case scenarios where, what if this goes down, or what if this went down? And then just try to think about how would you solve that today. And if you feel that, you're going through hoops and there's no accurate way, you're not confident about that decision, then take a look at, how do I find data that can, or how do I find tool sets that can feed into an existing CMDB, or how do I look for what tools out there offer a CMDB? But, those are some things that just to keep in mind, again, I'm tagging on top of what James said here is, I think those are important things to keep in mind. Even if you have something today, how good are you at being able to identify if there was an issue? Can you resolve that?
Chris Bonini, Director of Solutions Architects, and James McFadden, Senior Solutions Architect for Device42. Thank you so much for being here today. Great conversation, and appreciate your time today, so thank you. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today for the Hitchhiker's Guide to Device42 CMDB. And stay tuned for our next episode on CMDB challenges and best practices. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney. Thanks again for joining us. We hope to connect with you on another podcast soon.